Fog pressed against the windows thick, and fog pressed against the windows thick and greasy, smothering the gaslight into sickly halos. Her wedding dress dragged behind her 20 pounds of silk and French lace that her father had borrowed against his judgeship to afford. Each step upward felt like climbing toward her own execution. At the top of the stairs, Thaddeus Blackwood waited. He was 30 paces ahead, his back to her, one hand resting on the banister, with the casual possession of a man surveying his property. The wedding guests were still below drunk on his wine, celebrating the merger they called a marriage. The merger of Judge Marlowe's Boston connections with Blackwood's railroad empire. The merger of old law with new money. The merger of a desperate father's debts with a childless magnate's ambition. Thaddeus turned. In the half-light, his face was all hard angles. 29 years old, built like the iron rails he laid across the continent. Black hair swept back from a forehead that had never known doubt. Gray eyes that calculated profit margins when other men saw human faces. He wore his wedding suit like armor, every button a declaration of control. "Close the door." His voice carried the flat authority of a man accustomed to obedience. Not a request, a command. Genevieve's hand trembled on the brass handle. 22 years old, mathematics prodigy, her father's pride before the gambling debts consumed him. She had spent 3 years refusing suitors, insisting she would marry for affection or not at all. The door clicked shut behind her. Thaddeus crossed the room in 4 strides. His hands seized her wrist fingers like steel bands grip, calculated to bruise without breaking. He pulled her forward, and she stumbled, her hem catching under her heel. "We should establish the terms clearly." His breath smelled of scotch and cigar smoke. Up close, she could see the scar that ran through his left eyebrow, a souvenir from some violence he'd never explained during their 6 formal courtship meetings. "Terms," her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "This union is a transaction, Mrs. Blackwood." He released her wrist only to grip her shoulders, turning her to face the full-length mirror that dominated the east wall. "Look at what I've purchased." The mirror showed a girl drowning in white silk. Her auburn hair, so carefully pinned by her mother that morning, was already coming loose. Her hazel eyes, too wide, too wet, stared back at her with something between terror and fury. "My father destroyed the Blackwood name with cards and whiskey." Thaddeus continued, his voice a low monotone, as if reading from a ledger. "My brother died before he could rebuild. It crushed between 2 freight cars because he was drunk at noon. I am the last. The line ends with me, unless..." His hand moved to her throat, not choking, just resting there. A reminder of fragility. "Unless you give me an heir." Genevieve watched in the mirror as his other hand found the pins in her hair. One by one, he pulled them free. They clattered to the floor like spent bullets. Her hair fell in waves across her shoulders. "That is why I paid your father's debts." Pin. "That is why you're standing in this room." Pin. "Ainen. That is why you will perform your singular function." Pin. "Ethan." The veil came next. He didn't unfasten it. He gripped the lace and pulled. The fabric tore with a sound like ripping skin. The combs holding it in place scraped across her scalp, and she gasped, a small sound quickly swallowed. "Do not expect affection, Genevieve." He said her name like a stock price, a commodity, an asset on a balance sheet. "Do not expect tenderness or romance or any of the foolish sentiments women read about in novels. Those are luxuries, weaknesses." He turned her to face him, his hands now framing her face with a gentleness more terrifying than the bruising grip. "You are here only to give me an heir. Once that duty is done, you may live as you please. I will provide a generous allowance. You may travel, patronize the arts host salons. I will not dictate your days." His thumbs traced her cheekbones. His eyes were empty of everything but calculation. "But do not expect love." The words fell like stones into deep water. "I have none to give." He kissed her then. It was not the chaste press of lips from the ceremony. It was possession, ownership. His mouth tasted of smoke and something bitter she couldn't name. When he pulled back, there was blood on her lower lip where his teeth had caught it. "Now." He stepped away, began unbuttoning his collar. "Let us begin." What followed was mechanical, efficient, a transaction executed with the same precision he applied to rail contracts and freight schedules. The lamp was extinguished. In the darkness, Genevieve felt her wedding dress being unfastened with practiced ease. He'd clearly done this before, though not, she realized with sick clarity, with a wife. There was pain, brief, sharp, then settling into a deep ache that radiated through her hips. He moved above her with his eyes shut. His breathing controlled his mind clearly elsewhere. Calculating tomorrow's meetings, perhaps. Reviewing telegraph reports. She was a means to an end, and the end was being served. When it was finished, he rose immediately. She heard him dressing in the dark, the rustle of fabric, the clink of cufflinks. A match struck. In the flare of light, she saw him relit the lamp, his face already composed, already distant. He walked to the door without looking at the bed. There is a water closet through that door. Clean yourself. I've instructed the staff to bring breakfast to your rooms at 8. We will not share meals unless there are guests present. His hand was on the doorknob. Thaddeus? Her voice surprised them both. He paused but did not turn. Is this truly how it will be? For a moment so brief she might have imagined it, his shoulders tensed, then relaxed. This is precisely how it will be. The door opened, closed. His footsteps retreated down the hallway, growing fainter until they disappeared entirely. Genevieve lay alone in the enormous bed, the sheets beneath her stained with blood and other evidence of consummation. The fog outside had thickened. Somewhere in the valley below, a train whistle blew one of Thaddeus's engines, hauling freight through the November night, indifferent to everything but forward motion. She touched her swollen lip, tasted copper, felt the bruises already forming on her wrist, her shoulders, her hips. This was her life now. This was what her father's gambling debts had purchased. This was the price of survival. But as she lay there in the darkness, as the mansion settled around her, with creaks and sighs, something hardened in her chest. Not her heart that was too wounded, too raw. Something deeper. Something forged in the same furnace that turned iron ore into rails. She would survive this. She would find a way to survive this. And perhaps she would find a way to live with something more than mere survival. But first she needed to understand exactly what kind of man she'd married, and what kind of woman she would need to become. Morning came gray and bitter. Genevieve woke alone. The pillow beside hers was pristine, undented. He had not returned. The wedding dress lay in a heap on the floor where it had fallen, the torn veil draped across it like a burial shroud. She rose slowly, every muscle protesting. In the adjoining washroom, she found a copper tub already filled with hot water. Some invisible servant had prepared it while she slept. She lowered herself in, hissing as the heat found every tender place. The water turned pink. She scrubbed herself methodically, the way her mother had taught her to clean vegetables from the garden. Remove all evidence of soil and damage. Present only the clean surface. She dressed in a simple day dress from the trunk the servants had unpacked, pinned her hair into a severe bun, and examined her reflection. The girl from yesterday was gone. The woman looking back had emptier eyes. A knock at the door. Breakfast, ma'am. She recognized the voice, Mrs. Harriet Pembroke, the head housekeeper. A woman of 50 with iron gray hair and a spine that had never bent. Come in. Mrs. Pembroke entered with a tray. Coffee, toast, soft-boiled eggs, jam. She set it on the small table by the window, her movements precise. Mr. Blackwood has already breakfasted and departed for his study. He will not require your presence today. He's asked that you acquaint yourself with the East Wing. The West Wing is his domain and is not to be disturbed. I see. Genevieve poured coffee with steady hands. And what precisely am I meant to do in the East Wing? Mrs. Pembroke's expression didn't change. That is for you to determine, ma'am, Mr. Blackwood has been quite clear that you are mistress of your own time so long as you do not interfere with his work. His work. Genevieve sipped the coffee. It was good, rich, and dark. What is his work, Mrs. Pembroke? Beyond the obvious business of railroads. For the first time, something flickered in the housekeeper's eyes. Caution, perhaps. Or pity. Mr. Blackwood is a very private man, ma'am. Very particular about his routines and his spaces. I would suggest, she paused, choosing her words with visible care. I would suggest you give him a wide berth, particularly in the evenings. Does he drink? No, ma'am. Does he rage? No, ma'am. Then what exactly am I to fear? Mrs. Pembroke met her gaze directly. His indifference, ma'am. That is what you should fear most. After the housekeeper left, Genevieve stood at the window, watching the one burn off the valley. Below, she could see the sprawling grounds of Blackwood Manor. Gardens, stables, a massive carriage house. And beyond that, the reason for all of this wealth, the railroad. Twin iron rails cut through the landscape like surgical scars. Every 30 seconds, a freight train thundered past, hauling timber from the North Woods, grain from the Western Territories, coal from Pennsylvania. Thaddeus Blackwood had built this. Not inherited it, built it. With his own hands and his own ruthless will, he had driven rails across a continent and forced civilization to follow. The trains never stopped moving. Neither, Genevieve decided, would she. She spent the morning exploring the East Wing. It was lavish in the way of new money, too much gilt, too many mirrors, furniture imported from France but arranged without taste. The servants had clearly been instructed to give her privacy. She encountered no one in the hallways. But it was the locked door that caught her attention. Third floor at the end of a corridor, lined with hunting trophies, Thaddeus had probably never shot himself. The door was solid oak, reinforced with iron bands. Unlike every other door in the wing, this one had a modern lock, the kind banks used. Genevieve stood before it listening. From behind the door came sounds, mechanical sounds. The scratch of a pen on paper, the rustle of large sheets being moved. Low muttering in Thaddeus's voice, though she couldn't make out the words. She raised her hand to knock, then stopped. Mrs. Pembroke's words echoed. The West Wing is his domain and is not to be disturbed. But this was the East Wing, her domain supposedly. So why was this door here locked against her? She tried the handle, locked as expected. She knelt peering through the keyhole. The angle was wrong. She could only see a slice of the room beyond. Wooden tables. Large sheets of paper covered in diagrams. The edge of a metal instrument she couldn't identify. What was he doing in there? Footsteps behind her. She stood quickly, smoothing her skirts, attempting to look casual. A young man approached, perhaps 25, dressed in a clerk's suit, carrying an armload of rolled papers. He stopped when he saw her, his eyes widening. "Mrs. Blackwood? I apologize. I didn't realize you were," he stammered, clearly terrified. "Who are you?" "Henry Watts, ma'am. Mr. Blackwood's engineering assistant. I was just bringing him the revised survey maps for the northern expansion." Engineering assistant. Genevieve glanced at the locked door. Is that what's behind this door? Engineering work? Henry's face went pale. That is Mr. Blackwood doesn't like what Mr. Watts. Doesn't like anyone entering his workshop without explicit permission, ma'am. Even I must knock and wait for acknowledgement. His workshop. She smiled, though it felt like a grimace. How fascinating. And what does he work on in this workshop? The railroad, ma'am. He designs every bridge, every tunnel, every grade personally. He says you can't trust other men's calculations when lives depend on it. Before Genevieve could respond, the door opened from within. Thaddeus stood in the doorway. He'd removed his jacket and rolled his shirt sleeves to the elbow, revealing forearms corded with muscle and scored with old scars. His hair was disheveled, his eyes sharp with focus that slowly shifted to recognition, then displeasure. "Henry, you're late." "Yes, sir. I apologize, sir. Give me the maps." Henry thrust the rolled papers forward. Thaddeus took them without looking away from Genevieve. "My wife appears to have lost her way." The word wife sounded like an insult in his mouth. "I was exploring my wing," Genevieve said evenly, "as instructed. This room is not part of your wing. It's on the third floor east. That makes it mine." He stepped fully into the hallway, pulling the door shut behind him. "Everything in this house is mine, Genevieve. The wing designation is a courtesy, not a property deed. This workshop is private. You are not to enter it." "I wasn't attempting to enter. I was merely curious." "Curiosity is not one of your duties." Henry Watts had pressed himself against the wall, clearly wishing he could disappear into the wallpaper. Genevieve felt heat rise in her cheeks. "What exactly are my duties, then? Beyond the obvious?" Thaddeus's jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he might say something cutting. Instead, he turned to Henry. "Leave us." The young man fled. When they were alone in the corridor, Thaddeus closed the distance between them. He didn't touch her, but his proximity was its own kind of pressure. "Your duty," he said quietly, "is to conceive. Once you've done that, your duty is to gestate safely. Once the child is born, your duty is to recover sufficiently for presentation at necessary social functions. Beyond that, you have no duties. Do you understand?" "Perfectly." "Good." He started to turn away. "What's in the workshop, Thaddeus?" He paused. "Work." "What kind of work?" "The kind that built everything you see. The kind that pays for the dress you're wearing and the food you eat. The kind that doesn't concern you." "I'm good with mathematics," she said suddenly. "My father taught me. Calculus, geometry, engineering, principles. You could what?" He turned back, and for the first time she saw something other than indifference in his face. It was contempt. "You could help. You could contribute. This is not a partnership, Genevieve. This is not some romantic notion of husband and wife laboring side by side toward a common goal. You have one function. When you've performed it, we will both be free to live separate lives under the same roof." How terribly civilized. "Yes." His voice softened, which somehow made it worse. "It is. Most women in your position would be grateful for such an arrangement. They would take their allowance and their freedom and build lives of meaning elsewhere. They would not pry into workshops or question their husband's work. I am not most women." No, he studied her face as if seeing it for the first time. You're not, are you? But that changes nothing. He walked away, leaving her standing in the corridor with the locked door behind her and the sound of his footsteps fading ahead. Genevieve waited until he was gone. Then she pulled a hairpin from her button and knelt before the lock. Her father had taught her more than mathematics. The lock yielded after 40 seconds of patient manipulation. The door swung open on well-oiled hinges, revealing a room that took her breath away. It was nothing like the ostentatious excess of the rest of the manor. This was a working space Spartan and focused. 3 large drafting tables dominated the center, each covered with detailed engineering drawings. The walls were lined with bookshelves holding technical manuals, survey reports, and leather-bound journals filled with calculations in Thaddeus's precise hand. But it was the northern wall that captured her attention. A massive map of the United States covered the entire surface. Red lines marked existing railroad routes. Thaddeus's routes, she realized, seeing the Blackwood Railroad logo stamped at intervals. Blue lines showed planned expansions. And scattered throughout were small black X marks. She moved closer, studying the X marks. Each one was annotated in Thaddeus's handwriting. Sabotage. April 12, 1888. 3 dead. Another bridge collapse. December 3rd, 1888. 7 dead. Another track segment removed. February 15th, 1889. Derailment. 12 dead. 22 X marks in total. 22 incidents, 49 deaths, all on Thaddeus Blackwood's railroad, all in the past 18 months. Her fingers trembled as she traced the pattern. The incidents weren't random. They formed a line moving steadily north from the Virginia routes toward the planned expansion into Maine. Someone was systematically attacking the railroad, not with grand gestures or dramatic destruction, with surgical precision. A removed spike here, a weakened bridge timber there. Small acts that would look like any accidents, but would add up to catastrophic damage to the company's reputation and finances. This was what Thaddeus was working on. Not just building railroads, hunting whoever was destroying them. She pulled one of the journals from the shelf and opened it at random. November 3rd, 1889. Met with Pinkerton agents. They found nothing. The saboteur leaves no physical evidence. Must be someone with inside knowledge of routes and schedules. Suspect board member involvement. Cannot trust anyone. November 3rd, that was 2 days ago, 2 days before their wedding. She flipped back through the pages, reading faster. October 28th, 1889. Judge Marlowe approached me with proposal, his daughter for his debts. Normally would refuse such crude arrangement, but situation is desperate. Need heir to secure a line of succession before board can move against me. If I die without heir, company passes to board control. They could dismantle everything. Sell to competitors. The saboteur might be counting on this, so that was it. He hadn't married her out of desire or even simple pragmatism. He'd married her because he was at war, and he needed to secure his legacy before his enemy could strike a killing blow. She was a chess piece, a defensive move in a game she hadn't known they were playing. October 30th, 1889. Met Genevieve Marlowe for 3rd courtship meeting. She's intelligent, more than I expected. Asked technical questions about railroad operations that showed genuine understanding. Father taught her well. But intelligence in a wife is a complication, not an asset. Need her compliant, not curious. Will ensure she understands her limited role. Genevieve's hands tightened on the journal. Compliant, not curious. He'd actively planned to keep her ignorant and passive. She was about to turn another page when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Her heart stopped. She closed the journal, replaced it exactly where she'd found it, and moved toward the door. But the footsteps were too close. She'd never make it to the hallway without being seen leaving the workshop. She looked around desperately. There, a door in the eastern corner, partially hidden by a filing cabinet. Storage closet, probably. She slipped inside just as the main door opened. Through the crack, she saw Thaddeus enter, with Henry Watts trailing behind. Don't care what the Pinkerton report says, Thaddeus was saying. They're useless. 3 months and 49 deaths, and they have nothing but theories. Sir, they believe it's someone with access to the engineering schedules, someone who knows exactly when inspectors will check each section of track, which means it's someone in this house or at the company headquarters. Thaddeus unrolled the survey maps Henry had brought. Did you bring the personnel files I requested? Yes, sir. Henry produced a folder. Every employee with access to the schedule vault for the past 2 years. 63 names. Genevieve watched through the crack as Thaddeus spread the files across one of the drafting tables. He worked methodically, sorting them into piles based on criteria she couldn't discern from her hiding spot. This one, he tapped a file. Silas Renwick. He's been on the board for 15 years. Old friend of my father's. He voted against the northern expansion. Many board members voted against it, sir. But Renwick was the most vocal, said it was too risky, too expensive. He wanted to consolidate existing routes instead. Thaddeus pulled out a chair and sat studying the file. He's also been buying up company stock through intermediaries. Small amounts, different names. He probably thinks I don't notice. What would he gain from sabotage? If the company's reputation fails, stock prices drop. He buys low. Then if I die without an heir, the board takes control. They sell to the highest bidder, probably the Pennsylvania Railroad. Renwick makes a fortune and retires to his estate in Virginia. Henry shifted uncomfortably. That's quite an accusation, sir. It's strategy. Thaddeus's voice carried an edge sharp as broken glass. And strategy is how wars are won. He stood walking to the map on the wall. His finger traced the line of X marks. The next incident will be here. He tapped a point in New Hampshire. The White Mountain Crossing. We're scheduled to lay the final rails in 2 weeks. It's the most difficult section of the route, steep grades, narrow passages. One derailment there could kill 50 men and destroy public confidence completely. How can you be certain? Because it's what I would do. Thaddeus turned and Genevieve caught a glimpse of his face. It was hard, calculating, utterly devoid of doubt. If I wanted to cripple the Blackwood Railroad, I would wait until the most dramatic moment and strike where the damage would be maximized. White Mountain Crossing then is that moment. What will you do? Set a trap, announce the crossing publicly, make a show of the final rail ceremony, then move the actual operation 3 days earlier with the skeleton crew. If someone sabotages the decoy route, we'll know we have a traitor. If they target the real operation, we'll be waiting. And if they do neither, then I'm wrong and we proceed as normal. Thaddeus returned to the files. Either way, we'll have answers. Henry gathered the papers he'd brought. Will you tell Mrs. Blackwood about this? She might be in danger of— No! The word was absolute. But sir, my wife's only concern is providing an heir. I will not burden her with business matters she cannot understand or affect. The less she knows, the safer she is. And the safer she is, the more likely she is to successfully conceive and carry to term. From her hiding place, Genevieve felt her jaw tighten. Cannot understand. She was understanding perfectly well, actually. Better than his useless Pinkerton agents, apparently. Dismissed, Henry. And remember, no one discusses this outside this room. Not even the other assistants. Yes, sir. After Henry left, Thaddeus remained at the map, staring at the X marks. For a long moment, he simply stood there, his shoulders tight with tension she hadn't seen before. Then he spoke so quietly she almost didn't hear. 49 dead. 49 men who trusted Blackwood Rails to keep them safe. Fathers, sons, brothers. His hand pressed against the wall. I will find who did this, and I will bury them. It wasn't a vow, it was a statement of fact. Then he turned and left, locking the door behind him. Genevieve waited in the storage closet for a full 5 minutes before emerging. Her legs had cramped from standing still, and her heart was beating hard enough to hurt. She'd learned 3 things. First, Thaddeus Blackwood was hunting a saboteur who had killed 49 people. Second, he suspected his own board member, Silas Renwick. Third, he had no intention of telling her any of this, despite the fact that she was now legally bound to his fate. Well, Genevieve Marlowe had never been particularly good at following instructions she found unreasonable, and she'd just found a puzzle that her mathematical mind was already working to solve. If Thaddeus wanted her compliant and ignorant, he was going to be profoundly disappointed. She left the workshop, carefully relocking the door behind her. She had ledgers to find. 3 weeks after the wedding, Genevieve learned 2 things within the same hour. First, she was pregnant. Second, Silas Renwick was not just a saboteur. He was planning to sell the Blackwood Railroad piece by piece to the Pennsylvania line, and he needed Thaddeus dead to do it. The pregnancy revealed itself in the usual way. Morning sickness that bent her double over the wash basin breasts, tender enough that the corset felt like torture. Dr. Harrison Moore confirmed it with his examination, his weathered face creasing into what might have been a smile on a less somber man. Congratulations, Mrs. Blackwood. Approximately 6 weeks along. You conceived on or near your wedding night. Of course she had. Thaddeus Blackwood was nothing if not efficient. Does my husband know? I've sent word to his study. He'll want to implement certain precautions, I expect. Precautions. The word tasted like iron. She was still sitting in the examination room, still processing the reality of a child growing inside her, when Thaddeus arrived. He didn't knock. He simply opened the door and filled the frame, his eyes moving over her with the same calculating assessment he'd given to survey maps. How far along? 6 weeks, Mr. Blackwood, doctor. Moore replied. The first trimester is often the most delicate. I recommend complete bed rest. Actually, moderate activity is beneficial. Complete bed rest, Thaddeus repeated. His gaze hadn't left Genevieve. She is not to leave her chambers except under medical supervision. She is not to climb stairs. She is not to exert herself in any capacity. Thaddeus, Genevieve said quietly, I'm pregnant, not dying. The distinction may be narrower than you think. He turned to the doctor. My mother died in childbirth. So did my brother's wife. The Blackwood line has a history of difficult births. I will not take risks. For the first time since their wedding night, she saw something other than calculation in his face. It was fear, raw and quickly suppressed but unmistakable. I'll be careful, she said. You'll be confined. He looked at Dr. Moore. Hire a nurse, someone competent. She's to monitor Mrs. Blackwood around the clock and report any changes directly to me. Sir, that seems excessive. Do it. After he left, Dr. Moore packed his instruments with careful precision. He's not wrong to be cautious, Mrs. Blackwood. The mortality rates for women of childbearing age are... I know the statistics, doctor. She stood smoothing her skirts. My father presided over enough wrongful death cases. I'm aware of the risks. Then you understand his concern. I understand his priorities. She walked to the window. Below she could see the rail yard where crews were loading timber onto flat cars. The Heir is valuable. The vessel carrying it is replaceable. Dr. Moore said nothing to that. What could he say? But as he left, he paused at the door. For what it's worth, Mrs. Blackwood, I've known Thaddeus since he was a boy. He's harder than most men, more controlled than most, but he's not cruel. He's simply afraid of losing what matters. And what matters, Doctor? Legacy, continuation. The only immortality men like him believe in. She thought about that after he'd gone. Legacy, the railroad that bore his name, the fortune he'd built, the heir that would carry both forward. Not her, never her. The vessel was replaceable. So be it. She would use her confinement to finish what she'd started. The nurse arrived the next morning, Mrs. Adelaide Finch, 60 years old, with the build of a draft horse and the warmth of a February wind. She inspected Genevieve's chambers with military thoroughness, rearranged the furniture to her liking, and established a schedule that would have broken a lesser woman. 7 o'clock breakfast, 8 o'clock constitutional, around the room 12 laps, 9 o'clock rest, 10 o'clock correspondence, 11 o'clock rest, noon luncheon, 1 o'clock rest, Genevieve finished. How much of this day involves me being conscious? As much as Mr. Blackwood deems safe, Mrs. Finch's expression could have curdled milk. He's been quite clear about his expectations. The child's health is paramount, and my health is important insofar as it serves the child's well-being. At least she was honest, but Mrs. Finch had a weakness, and Genevieve found it within the first week. The woman was terrified of blood, a small cut while opening correspondence, a drop of red on white paper, and Mrs. Finch had gone pale and stepped into the hallway to compose herself. It was a tiny window, but Genevieve had spent 3 weeks learning to pick locks quickly. The workshop was empty at mid-morning. Thaddeus was at the rail yard supervising the loading of equipment for the White Mountain crossing. She had perhaps 20 minutes. She went straight for the files. Silas Renwick's folder was thick. Thaddeus had been thorough. Bank records showing steady stock purchases. Correspondence with Pennsylvania Railroad executives. Coded telegrams that Genevieve's mathematical mind began to decipher almost immediately. They were using a substitution cipher. Crude, really. Each letter shifted by a prime number sequence. She'd cracked it in under 5 minutes. The decoded messages made her blood run sluggish with dread. Package will be delivered. White Mountain Crossing, November 18th. Ensure Blackwood is present. Payment upon confirmation. November 18th was in 2 weeks. Package. In the context of sabotage and assassination, that could only mean one thing. A bomb. She kept reading, her hands shaking now. Board meeting scheduled November 20th. If package succeeds, majority vote will transfer control. Pennsylvania prepared to purchase full assets by month's end. Your commission $500,000. $500,000. More money than most men saw in a lifetime. Silas wasn't just sabotaging the railroad. He was orchestrating a murder and a corporate takeover simultaneously, and Thaddeus had no idea the attack was coming in 2 weeks. She heard footsteps in the hallway. Mrs. Finch returning. Genevieve grabbed 2 pages, the decoded telegram, and a bank transfer record, folded them into her bodice, and was back in bed with her eyes shut when the nurse entered. Resting, I see. Very good. That night, she waited until the house was quiet. Mrs. Finch slept in the adjoining room, but the woman snored like a sawmill. Genevieve slipped out down the hallway to the west wing. She'd never been to Thaddeus's chambers. The door was unlocked. He feared nothing inside his own house. He was at his desk, still dressed despite the late hour, reviewing what looked like payroll ledgers by lamplight. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face before hardening into disapproval. You're supposed to be in bed. You're supposed to be alive in 2 weeks. She pulled the papers from her bodice and placed them on his desk. Silas Renwick is planning to kill you at White Mountain Crossing. He's planted a bomb. The attack happens November 18th during your inspection. Thaddeus didn't move. His eyes went to the papers, then back to her face. How did you get these? I broke into your workshop, decoded his telegrams, traced his bank transfers. He's been selling stock information to Pennsylvania Railroad for 18 months. The sabotage was him, all of it, and in 2 weeks he ends it by ending you. You broke into my workshop. Of all the information she'd just given him, that was what he focused on. Did you hear what I said? He's going to kill you? I heard you. He stood walking around the desk. I heard that my pregnant wife, who was supposed to be on bed rest instead, picked the lock to my private workspace, rifled through confidential documents, and apparently taught herself cryptography. My father taught me cryptography. And yes, I picked your lock. It's a simple 5-pin tumbler. A child could do it. Genevieve, he's going to kill you, Thaddeus. She grabbed his arm, felt the muscle tense beneath her fingers. In 2 weeks, at White Mountain, he has men waiting. The bomb is already in place. If you go to that crossing, you'll die. For a long moment, he simply looked at her. Then slowly, he picked up the papers she'd brought. He read them in silence. His face revealed nothing, but she saw his jaw tighten. How long have you been investigating this? 3 weeks. 3 weeks. He set the papers down with careful precision. You've been pregnant for 6 weeks, which means for half your pregnancy, you've been sneaking into my workshop, decoding my files, and conducting an investigation I specifically forbade you from pursuing. You didn't forbid me, you simply didn't tell me. Because it's dangerous. And childbirth isn't. She felt heat rising in her cheeks. You lecture me about bed rest and safety while you walk into a trap that will kill you and leave me a widow. Do you see the contradiction? This is different. Well, how fun, Anton? Because this is my responsibility. His voice rose the first time she'd heard him shout. The railroad is mine. The investigation is mine. The danger is mine to face. Your responsibility is to stay safe and deliver my heir. That is all I require from you. Require? She stepped back. Is that what I am? A requirement? His expression shuddered. Yes. The word hung between them like a blade. Then consider this. Her voice was brittle now, hard as his had ever been. If you die in 2 weeks, your heir dies with you. I'm 6 weeks pregnant. If I lose you, I lose the Blackwood name, the Blackwood fortune, and any protection it provides. Silas will make sure of that. So when I save your life tonight, I'm not doing it out of affection or duty. I'm doing it because you're worth more to me alive than dead. She turned to leave. Genevieve. She paused at the door. Thank you. The words sounded like they cost him. For the information. You're welcome. Will you cancel the inspection? No, she spun back. Are you insane? I'm strategic. He was already moving to his wardrobe, pulling out a dark coat. If I cancel, Silas knows I'm aware of his plan. He'll adapt, go underground, strike when I'm not expecting it. But if I proceed as planned with modifications, I can catch him in the act. Modifications? I'll send a decoy to the crossing. Someone wearing my coat, my hat. From a distance, in the confusion of the work site, Silas's men won't know the difference until it's too late. Meanwhile, I'll position armed guards around the perimeter. When they detonate the bomb, we'll have them. It was, Genevieve had to admit, a sound strategy. And if something goes wrong, then you'll be a wealthy widow. He buckled a gun belt around his waist. She hadn't known he owned firearms. But things won't go wrong. I don't lose Genevieve. I don't have that luxury. She watched him prepare this man she'd married, this stranger who calculated everything and felt nothing. What will you do with Silas? After I have proof, turn him over to federal authorities. Sabotaging a railroad is a federal crime. Attempted murder of a railroad owner even more so. He'll hang. Good. Thaddeus paused in his preparations, looking at her with something that might have been approval. You have a ruthless streak, Mrs. Blackwood. I learned from the best, Mr. Blackwood. He almost smiled. Almost. Go back to your chambers. Mrs. Finch will worry. She left him there, arming himself for war. The next day from her window, she watched him ride out before dawn. He looked back at the manor once, and she wondered if he was looking at her window. Then he was gone, and all she could do was wait. The waiting nearly killed her. Mrs. Finch noticed her agitation, prescribed chamomile tea and bed rest. Genevieve paced her chambers instead, 12 laps turning into 50 into 100. Her mind ran through every possible outcome, every variable. What if the decoy wasn't convincing enough? What if Silas had more men than Thaddeus anticipated? What if the bomb was larger than expected? The sun climbed. Noon came and went, 1 o'clock. 2. At 3:15, she heard the train whistle. Not the usual freight whistle. This was sharper, more urgent. The emergency signal. Her heart stopped. She ran to the window. Below, she could see men gathering at the rail yard shouting. A telegram runner sprinting toward the manor. Something had happened. She was halfway down the stairs when Mrs. Finch caught her. "Mrs. Blackwood, you're not to exert yourself. Let go of me. The baby will be fine." She wrenched free, kept running. Down the grand staircase, through the entrance hall, out onto the gravel drive where the telegram runner was just arriving. She intercepted him, grabbed the telegram from his hands before he could protest. Explosion, White Mountain, stop. 4 dead, stop. Suspects apprehended, stop. Blackwood unharmed, stop. 4 dead, but Thaddeus unharmed. She read it 3 more times before her hands stopped shaking. He returned at sunset, covered in dirt and powder burns, but alive. Very much alive. He dismounted in the courtyard and saw her standing on the steps, one hand on the railing, the other pressed to her still flat stomach. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Then he climbed the steps and stood before her, close enough that she could smell smoke and sweat and something metallic she didn't want to identify. "The decoy worked," he said. "Silas's men detonated the bomb when they thought I was inspecting the new rails. Killed 4 of their own in the blast. We had them surrounded. They confessed everything. Silas is in federal custody." "Good. You saved my life. I saved my investment." This time he did smile, small, brief, but genuine. "Yes, you did." He reached out, hesitated, then placed his hand over hers where it rested on her stomach. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for this, for the warning, for everything." It was the closest thing to tenderness he'd shown her. But it wasn't enough. She pulled her hand away. "You're welcome. Now, if you'll excuse me, Dr. Moore has ordered bed rest." She left him standing there in the fading light, and she didn't look back. The child came in July. Summer heat pressed against the windows of Blackwood Manor like a living thing, thick and suffocating. Genevieve's labor began at dawn, a tearing pain that woke her from fitful sleep and doubled her over before she could even call for help. Mrs. Finch found her on the floor beside the bed, her nightgown soaked with fluid and blood. What followed was 36 hours of hell, Doctor. Moore arrived within the hour, took one look at Genevieve, and sent for specialists from Boston. They came on Thaddeus's private train, 2 obstetricians with grave faces and instruments that looked like medieval torture devices. The baby was breech, turned wrong, lodged sideways, refusing to descend. Genevieve drifted in and out of consciousness, the pain so constant it became a kind of white noise. She heard voices arguing above her doctor. Moore's calm baritone, another man's sharp tenor. Someone saying the words hemorrhaging in fetal distress and prepare for the worst. At hour 30, they gave her ether. The world softened into gray fog, but the pain remained a distant roar, like a train approaching through a tunnel. She heard Dr. Moore speaking to someone outside the room. "Can't get the child out without damaging the mother, and I can't save the mother without risking the child. If it comes to a choice," Thaddeus's voice low and hard, "what choice between Mrs. Blackwood's life and the child's? If I have to make that decision, if there's no other option, who do I save?" The silence that followed was infinite. Genevieve tried to speak, to tell them she could hear that she had opinions about her own survival, but the ether had stolen her voice. Save the child. Thaddeus's words were barely audible, but they cut through the fog like a scalpel. "The Blackwood line must continue. If you can only save one, you save my son." Dr. Moore's response was equally quiet. "You understand what you're asking me to do?" "I understand exactly what I'm asking. Save the child. My wife understood the risks when she agreed to this marriage. The heir is what matters." Footsteps, a door closing. Genevieve lay in the gray fog, feeling the pain and the ether and the knowledge settling into her bones like lead weights. He'd chosen. When forced to decide between her life and the child's, he'd chosen the child without hesitation. She was the vessel. The vessel was replaceable. The heir was forever. Something inside her, something that had been cracked since the wedding night, fractured further during the pregnancy, held together by sheer will and stubborn hope, finally shattered. She stopped fighting. Let the ether take her. Let the pain take her. Let it all end. She was done. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. At hour 36, the baby turned. Some miracle of anatomy or physics or pure stubborn luck. The child shifted, descended, crowned. Dr. Moore shouted for forceps, for pressure, for more hands. Genevieve felt herself tearing, felt tissue giving way, felt blood pouring out in quantities that surely meant death. Then a cry, high, thin, furious. A baby's first breath. "It's a boy," someone said. "A healthy boy." Through the fog, Genevieve heard triumph in their voices. They'd done it. They'd extracted the air. Mission accomplished. She heard Thaddeus enter the room, heard his sharp intake of breath. "Let me see him." The crying stopped. She imagined Heir's son, their son, being placed in Thaddeus's arms for the first time. "Nicholas," Thaddeus said softly. "Nicholas Cole Blackwood." Nicholas, after Saint Nicholas, a protector of children. The irony would have made her laugh if she'd had the strength. "Mr. Blackwood," Dr. Moore's voice was urgent now. "Your wife is hemorrhaging. I need to do what you can, but the boy is your priority. Make sure he's healthy." "Sir, Mrs. Blackwood, I said do what you can." Genevieve felt hands on her, pressure on her abdomen, the sharp sting of sutures. But it was all distant now, happening to someone else's body. She heard the baby crying again. Heard Thaddeus soothing him with awkward pats and uncertain murmurs. She wondered if the child could sense it, the absence of warmth in those hands, the calculation in that voice. She wondered if Nicholas would grow up knowing his mother had nearly died giving birth to him, and his father had chosen his life over hers without blinking. She wondered if he would understand someday that he'd been wanted not for himself but for what he represented: legacy, continuation, immortality. She shut her eyes and let the darkness take her. She woke 3 days later. The room was bright with afternoon sun. Her body felt like it had been torn apart and stitched back together with barbed wire. Every breath hurt. Every slight movement sent pain radiating through her core. Mrs. Finch sat in a chair beside the bed knitting. "You're awake. I'll fetch Dr. Moore." "Wait." Genevieve's voice was a ruined rasp. The baby, healthy, strong, already nursing well with the wet nurse. Wet nurse. "Mr. Blackwood felt it best given your condition." "You've been quite ill, Mrs. Blackwood. Fever, infection. We nearly lost you twice." "Of course. Why would Thaddeus risk her inadequate milk when he could hire professionals? I want to see him." Mrs. Finch's knitting needles paused. "Dr. Moore said you're to rest for at least another week before—" "I want to see my son." Something in her voice, some edge of steel that even morphine couldn't dull, made the nurse put down her knitting and leave. She returned 10 minutes later with a bundle of white linen. Inside was a tiny face, red and wrinkled, with a shock of black hair and eyes that couldn't quite focus yet. "Nicholas." Mrs. Finch held him out. "Would you like to hold him?" Genevieve looked at the child. Her child. The life she'd carried for 9 months, nearly died delivering. The child Thaddeus had chosen over her without hesitation. And she felt nothing. Not love, not hatred, not even curiosity, just a vast empty nothing where maternal instinct should have been. "No," she said quietly. "I'm too weak. I might drop him." "But Mrs. Blackwood, take him to his father. He's Mr. Blackwood's heir, after all. That's what matters." Mrs. Finch's face showed shock, then pity. "Perhaps when you're stronger, I am strong enough to know my limitations. The child needs a mother who can care for him. I am not that woman. I am simply the vessel who delivered him. Take him to his father." After they left, Genevieve turned her face to the wall and made a decision. She would survive this. She would heal. She would live. But she would never, ever forgive. The contract was fulfilled. She'd given Thaddeus his heir. Now she would give him exactly what he'd asked for on their wedding night, a wife who lived her own life and demanded nothing from him, including love for the child he'd chosen over her. 7 years passed like a slow bleed. Genevieve Blackwood became a ghost in her own house. She recovered from the birth, though Dr. Moore said it was a near thing. The infection had ravaged her for weeks, leaving her hollow-eyed and skeletal. When she was finally strong enough to leave her chambers, she found that the world had reorganized itself around her absence. Nicholas lived in the nursery wing with his wet nurse, then his nanny, then his governess. A parade of hired women who raised him according to Thaddeus's exacting standards. Genevieve saw him for 30 minutes each afternoon, a formal tea time where the child sat with perfect posture and answered her polite questions with polite responses. "How are your studies, Nicholas?" Progressing adequately, mother. Are you enjoying your piano lessons? They are educational, mother. He never called her mama, never ran to her, never cried in her presence or laughed or showed any emotion beyond carefully managed courtesy. He was 7 years old and already a perfect miniature of his father. Thaddeus had gotten exactly what he wanted. As for Genevieve, she built a life in the spaces between. She became patron of the Railroad Widows Fund, established after the White Mountain Crossing incident that had killed 4 men. She organized literacy programs for the workers' children. She hosted salons for Boston intellectuals who found her sharp mind refreshing in a world of vapid society wives. She was admired, respected, celebrated in the newspapers as a model of grace and charity. She was also utterly, devastatingly alone. Thaddeus kept his distance. They maintained separate wings, separate schedules, separate lives. They appeared together at necessary functions, charity galas, board dinners, Christmas gatherings. They played their roles with professional competence. The devoted husband, the gracious wife, the perfect family. All of it a lie so polished it gleamed. At night, Genevieve stood at her window and watched the trains roll past, endless and inexorable, and wondered if this was all there would ever be, this performance, this emptiness, this slow death by 1,000 formal dinners. But she had made her choice. The contract was fulfilled. She was free as Thaddeus had promised, free to live a life that felt like a beautiful, suffocating cage. And somewhere in the house, Silas Renwick's fate had been sealed. The trial had been swift, the verdict unanimous. Federal marshals had taken him in chains to a military prison where traitors were hanged. The newspapers called it justice. Thaddeus called it closure. Genevieve simply called it finished. One enemy defeated. But the damage he'd caused, the 49 deaths, the years of sabotage, the fear that had driven Thaddeus to marry her in the first place, those wounds remained. November 1897. The first snow came early that year, dusting the valley in white that would deepen as winter settled in. Genevieve stood in the music room playing Chopin with mechanical precision. She'd learned that if she kept her hands busy, her mind couldn't wander to dangerous places. The door opened behind her. She didn't need to turn to know it was Thaddeus. She'd learned the sound of his footsteps years ago, measured, purposeful, unavoidable. She stopped playing but didn't turn around. Genevieve. His voice was the same as always, controlled. I need to speak with you about Nicholas. Now she turned. Thaddeus stood in the doorway and, for the first time in years, she really looked at him. He was 36 now, still handsome in that hard-edged way, but there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, gray threading through the black hair at his temples. Is he ill? No, he's... Thaddeus paused and she recognized the expression on his face. Uncertainty. He so rarely showed it that when he did, it was almost shocking. He's lonely. He has his tutors, his governesses. You. He needs a mother, Genevieve. The words hung in the air between them like an accusation. She stood smoothing her dark green velvet dress. He has a mother, one who ensures he's clothed, fed, educated, and presented appropriately at social functions. One who stays out of the way of his development, as was the arrangement. I never arranged for you to be absent from his life. Didn't you? She heard the ice in her own voice and didn't care. When you chose him over me in that delivery room, when you handed him to wet nurses and nannies without consulting me, when you made it clear that my only value was in producing him, what exactly did you expect? Thaddeus's jaw tightened. I expected you to be his mother. I am exactly the mother you made me. She walked toward him, watching him tense. You wanted an heir, not a family. You got your heir. A perfect little soldier who sits straight and speaks properly and never ever shows weakness. Congratulations, Thaddeus. He's exactly like you. That's not... He stopped, ran a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration she'd never seen before. He looks at me with fear in his eyes. Every time I enter a room, he goes rigid. He's 7 years old and he's terrified of disappointing me. Then perhaps you should stop being so terrifying. I don't know how. The admission was so quiet, so raw, that for a moment Genevieve forgot to be angry. Thaddeus met her gaze and she saw something she'd never seen before in those gray eyes. Desperation. I'm watching him turn into me, he said, and I'm realizing that everything I became, the control, the emotional distance, the inability to show affection, it's poison. It nearly destroyed us. Now it's destroying him. What do you want from me? He took a breath. I want you to teach me how to be different, how to be softer with him, how to let him be a child instead of an heir in training. Genevieve studied him. After 7 years of careful distance, of polite formality, of a marriage that existed only on paper, he was asking her for help. Why should I? Because he's your son too, and because, another pause, because I was wrong about everything and I don't know how to fix it. It was the closest thing to an apology she would ever get from Thaddeus Blackwood, but it wasn't enough. I don't know if I can love him, she said honestly. You took that from me when you chose him over me. Every time I look at him, I remember that delivery room. I remember you telling the doctor to save him and let me die. How do I love the child who was worth more than my life? Thaddeus flinched, as if she'd struck him. I can't change what I did, but I can. A commotion in the hallway cut him off. Running footsteps, shouting. The door burst open. Henry Watts, no longer a young assistant, but now Thaddeus's chief engineer, stood there, wild-eyed and breathing hard. Sir, Nicholas is missing. The world stopped. What? Thaddeus was already moving. What do you mean, missing? He asked the stable master if he could ride Thunder. The new pony said he wanted to see the frost on the North Ridge before the storm came in. The stable master thought he'd gotten permission from you. The storm. Thaddeus looked out the window. The snow had intensified in the last hour, thick flakes swirling in wind that was picking up speed. How long has he been gone? At least an hour, sir. Maybe longer. Genevieve felt something crack open in her chest. An hour. In this weather, a 7-year-old child on an unfamiliar pony. Thaddeus was already running. She ran after him. The search lasted 3 hours and felt like 3 lifetimes. Thaddeus organized it with military precision. Every man on the estate, every stable hand and gardener and field worker mobilized within minutes. Lanterns, horses, blankets. They spread out across the property in systematic search patterns, calling Nicholas's name into the howling wind. Genevieve rode with them, ignoring the protests about propriety and safety. She'd learned to ride as a child, and she rode now with reckless determination, pushing her mare through drifts that came up to the stirrups. Nicholas, Nicholas. The wind tore the words away. The snow was blinding now, a white wall that erased the world. Temperature dropping, visibility nearly zero. A child couldn't survive this. Not for long. She thought of Nicholas's serious little face, his careful manners, the way he held himself so rigidly at tea time, never relaxing, never being a child. She thought of Thaddeus's words. He looks at me with fear in his eyes. A 7-year-old boy who'd ridden out alone into a storm because he wanted to see the frost. Because maybe, just maybe, he was attempting to be brave enough to earn his father's approval. For the first time in 7 years, Genevieve felt something break through the wall she'd built around her heart. Terror. She spurred her horse faster. It was Thaddeus who found him. The shout went up from the North Ridge near the cliff edge they called Devil's Drop. Genevieve turned her mare and rode hard, her heart hammering against her ribs. She reached the ridge to find Thaddeus on the ground, kneeling in the snow, cradling a small dark shape against his chest. Nicholas. Genevieve threw herself from the saddle and ran. Up close, she could see the child was unconscious, his skin a terrifying bluish-white ice crystals clinging to his eyelashes. His left leg bent at an angle that made her stomach turn. Is he? He's breathing. Thaddeus's voice was ragged. Barely. We need to get him inside, now. He stood lifting Nicholas like the child weighed nothing and ran for his horse. Someone had brought a wagon. They loaded Nicholas into the back, wrapped him in every blanket they had. The ride back to the manor was a blur of jostling movement and whispered prayers. Dr. Moore was waiting when they arrived, having been summoned by telegraph. He took one look at Nicholas and his face went gray. Get him upstairs. I need hot water, clean cloths, and my surgical kit. They laid Nicholas in his bed, the blue-papered nursery room that Thaddeus had ordered decorated in Blackwood colors. The room that had always felt too formal, too adult for a child. Doctor. Moore worked quite quickly, examining the leg, listening to the labored breathing. Finally, he stood wiping his hands. Compound fracture of the tibia, that I can set. But the hypothermia, he shook his head. His core temperature is dangerously low. Lungs are filling with fluid. Pneumonia will set in by morning. What can you do? Thaddeus demanded. Keep him warm. Monitor the fever. Pray. Dr. Moore met Thaddeus's eyes. But Mr. Blackwood, you need to understand, the boy is weak. Not physically, the break will heal, but he has no will to fight. I've seen it before in children who, he paused delicately, in children who don't feel loved. They surrender easier. They let go. The words hit like bullets. Thaddeus's face went white. That's not, he knows Does he? Dr. Moore's voice was gentle but firm. Because from what I've observed over the years, that child labors very hard to earn your approval and never quite manages it. A boy who feels loved fights to live. A boy who feels like a disappointment Lets the winter take him. Thaddeus staggered backward as if pushed. Genevieve stood still, watching Nicholas's small chest rise and fall with terrible rattling breaths. What does he need? She heard herself ask. Dr. Moore turned to her. Warmth, human contact, someone to tether him to this world and give him a reason to fight. He hesitated. He needs his mother. I'm not, the words died in her throat. Because looking at Nicholas now broken and blue, and fighting for each breath, she realized something. She'd spent 7 years punishing Thaddeus by withholding love from their son. But the only person she'd truly punished was Nicholas. An innocent child who'd never asked to be born, never asked to be the heir, never asked for any of this. A child who'd ridden into a storm alone because he didn't know how to ask for the love he desperately needed. I'll stay with him, she said quietly. Dr. Moore nodded. I'll be downstairs if you need me. Mrs. Finch as well. She's quite experienced with fevers. After he left, Genevieve approached the bed. Nicholas looked so small beneath the blankets, so fragile. His breathing was labored, each exhale rattling in his chest like dice in a cup. Thaddeus stood on the opposite side of the bed, staring down at his son with an expression of such raw anguish that it was almost painful to witness. This is my fault, he said. His voice was destroyed. I did this to him. I made him so desperate for my approval that he rode into a blizzard to prove himself brave. I made him feel so unloved that he has no will to fight. Thaddeus, I'm a monster. He looked up, meeting her eyes. I've spent 7 years turning my son into a copy of myself, and now he's dying because of it. Because I never learned how to love him. His voice broke. Genevieve watched this man, this hard, controlled man, shatter. I don't know what to do, Thaddeus whispered. Tell me what to do. Before she could answer, Nicholas stirred. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy with fever. His mouth moved, forming words that barely had sound. Papa! Thaddeus moved to the bedside instantly, taking Nicholas's small hand. I'm here, son. Papa's here. Cold. The word was a thin thread. So cold. I know, we're warming you. You're going to be fine. Hurts. Nicholas's breath hitched. Papa, I'm sorry. Tried to be brave. You were brave. You are brave. You don't have to prove anything to me. But Nicholas wasn't hearing him. The fever was rising, pulling him under. His head turned restlessly on the pillow, small whimpers escaping with each breath. Dark. Don't want dark. Stay with me, Nicholas. Look at me. Stay. Mama. The word came out on a sob. Want Mama. Please. Thaddeus froze. Nicholas's eyes shut, tears leaking from beneath the lids. His breathing grew more labored, the rattle louder. Mama sing. Mama warm. Want Mama. Dr. Moore appeared in the doorway, his face grave. The fever's spiking. If he doesn't calm down, if his heart rate doesn't slow, He didn't finish the sentence. Thaddeus looked at Genevieve across the bed. In his eyes, she saw everything. 7 years of mistakes. 7 years of emotional distance and damage done to all 3 of them. 7 years of a marriage that had destroyed everyone it touched. And she saw him surrender. He stood, walked around the bed, and stopped in front of her. Then Thaddeus Blackwood, railroad magnate, former Army engineer, the man who'd built an empire with his bare hands and never bent to anyone, dropped to his knees. Please. His voice was wrecked. Please save him. I'm begging you. Forget everything I've done. Forget what I chose in that delivery room. Forget all of it. She saw a 7-year-old boy who'd never been allowed to be a child, and she realized that while she couldn't change the past, she could choose what happened next. Stand up, Thaddeus. He looked up at her, his eyes wet. Take me to him. Genevieve had never felt less like a mother than in that moment, but she climbed into Nicholas's bed anyway. Dr. Moore had explained it. Skin-to-skin contact. Body heat transfer. The sound of a heartbeat, the rhythm of breathing, the physical presence of another human being, these things could anchor a dying child to life. She removed her outer layers until she was in just her chemise. Nicholas's nightshirt was already soaked with sweat and snow melt. She pulled him against her, his small body frighteningly fragile against her skin. He was burning with fever and shivering with hypothermia simultaneously. His skin was clammy, his breathing shallow and fast. I've got you, she whispered. Mama's got you. The word felt foreign in her mouth. Mama. She'd never said it before. Nicholas had never called her that, but she said it now over and over, a prayer or an incantation or a promise. Mama's here. You're safe. I've got you. She wrapped herself around him, her warmth flowing into his chill. She held him the way she should have held him 7 years ago when he was newborn and needing his mother's touch. Better late than never, she thought bitterly. Nicholas stirred against her, his fevered mind surfacing briefly. Mama. Yes, baby, I'm here. Cold? I know, but I'm warm. Feel how warm I am. You can have all my warmth. Take it. I don't need it. She pressed her cheek to his forehead, felt the furnace heat of fever there, started singing a song her own mother had sung to her lifetimes ago. Oh, Shenandoah, I long to hear you, away you rolling river. Her voice was rusty, unpracticed, but she kept singing the melody simple and shallow and familiar. Nicholas relaxed slightly against her, his breathing while still labored slowed a fraction. From the chair in the corner, Thaddeus watched. He'd been there for hours, silent and still, as stone watching his wife save their son with nothing but warmth and song and a love she'd convinced herself she didn't have. The night stretched on. Midnight came and went, 1 o'clock, 2. Nicholas's fever climbed higher. He thrashed, whimpered, cried out. Genevieve held him through it all, her body aching, her arms cramping, her voice hoarse from singing. But she didn't let go. At 3 in the morning, Nicholas's breathing changed. The rattle deepened, his chest barely rising. Dr. Moore, checking periodically, went pale. His lungs are filling. If this continues, he's not dying. Genevieve's voice was fierce. Do you hear me, Nicholas? You are not dying. You are going to fight. You are going to live, because I need you to live. Do you understand? I need you. She didn't know when it had become true, but it was. This child she'd held at arm's length for 7 years, this miniature version of his father, she needed him. Not because he was an heir or a duty or a contract fulfilled, because he was hers, her son, her Nicholas. Fight, she whispered against his hair. Please fight. 4 o'clock came, the darkest hour they called it. The hour when the dying let go. Genevieve held tighter. And then Nicholas's breathing changed. The terrible rattle smoothed. The rapid shallow gasps deepened, slowed, became almost peaceful. Dr. Moore was at the bedside, in an instant, hand on the child's forehead. The fever, his voice filled with wonder. It's breaking. Genevieve felt it too, the furnace heat against her skin cooling. Nicholas's body relaxing, the rigid tension draining away. He was sleeping, really sleeping, deeply and naturally. He's through the worst, Dr. Moore said quietly. The lung sounds are clearing. His heartbeat is stronger. The old doctor's voice cracked. He's going to live, Mrs. Blackwood. Only then did Genevieve let herself cry. Silent tears streaming down her face as she held her son, feeling his chest rise and fall in steady, healthy rhythm. He was going to live. She'd saved him. Thaddeus made a sound, something between a sob and a laugh. He stood crossed to the bed and collapsed beside it, his hand reaching out to touch Nicholas's hair with a gentleness Genevieve had never seen from him. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you. They stayed like that as dawn broke, Genevieve holding Nicholas, Thaddeus kneeling beside the bed, the three of them together for the first time in 7 years. A family, however broken, a family attempting to heal. When Nicholas woke that afternoon, his eyes were clear. He looked up at Genevieve, who'd finally allowed herself to be dressed, but remained on the bed beside him. Mama? The word was tentative, questioning, as if he wasn't sure he was allowed to say it. Yes, sweetheart. You stayed. Of course I stayed. But you never... He stopped, uncertain. I know. She smoothed his hair back from his forehead. I should have been here all along. I should have... Her throat tightened. I made mistakes, Nicholas. Terrible mistakes. And I'm so sorry. Father says sorry is for when you do something wrong. Genevieve glanced at Thaddeus, who stood in the doorway looking haggard. Your father is right, she said, and I was wrong, very wrong. Can you forgive me? Nicholas studied her with those serious gray eyes, his father's eyes. Then slowly he reached up and touched her face. Will you stay now? If you want me to. I want you to. She gathered him into her arms, carefully avoiding his splinted leg. He clung to her, this small boy who'd spent 7 years being brave and perfect and alone. I love you, she whispered. I should have said it before. I should have shown you. But I'm saying it now, and I'll keep saying it every day for the rest of your life. I love you, Nicholas. He buried his face in her shoulder and wept. And Genevieve held him and let him cry, let him be 7 years old and scared and hurt. Let him be a child instead of an heir. When he finally quieted, exhausted from emotion and healing, he looked up at her. Mama, can you sing the river song again? As many times as you want, baby. She sang, and Nicholas drifted back to sleep in her arms. Across the room, Thaddeus watched them. When Genevieve met his eyes, she saw raw emotion there. Grief, relief, something that might have been love if she squinted. After Nicholas was settled after Dr. Moore had checked him one more time and declared him on the road to recovery, Thaddeus asked to speak with her. They stood in the hallway outside Nicholas's room, neither quite knowing how to begin. "I'll give you anything," Thaddeus said finally. "Divorce, the house in Boston, an allowance large enough to ensure you never want for anything. Your freedom, complete and total. You've fulfilled your contract. More than fulfilled it. You saved Nicholas when I—" His voice broke. "When I had driven him to the point where he didn't want to save himself. You're free, Genevieve. You can go." She'd waited 7 years to hear those words. Now that she had, they rang hollow. "You once told me," she said slowly, "that once I gave you an heir, I could live as I pleased." "Yes. Then I choose to stay." He stared at her. "What? I choose to live as I please. And it pleases me to be a mother to my son. A real mother, not the ghost I've been." She stepped closer, watching him tense. "But things will change, Thaddeus. The old contract is burned. From this moment forward, I'm not a vessel. I'm Nicholas's mother. I decide his education. I decide his activities. He will know laughter. He will know play. He will know unconditional love. Yes, anything. And if you attempt to stop me, if you try to turn him back into that frightened little soldier, I will take him and disappear. Your railroad fortune means nothing compared to a mother's determination. Do you understand?" "I understand." "Good." She turned to go back into Nicholas's room. "Genevieve." She paused. "What about me?" His voice was quiet. "What becomes of me?" She looked back at him. This man who'd broken her. This man who was finally breaking himself. "That's up to you," she said. "You can be Thaddeus Blackwood, railroad magnate who lives in the West Wing and sees his son at dinner. Or you can try to be something else. Someone who knows how to love. But you'll have to introduce yourself, Thaddeus, because we don't know that man." She left him standing in the hallway alone with the weight of 7 years of mistakes. But as she settled into the chair beside Nicholas's bed, watching him sleep peacefully, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Maybe it was too late for her and Thaddeus. But for Nicholas, for her son, it was never too late. Spring came to the Hudson Valley like a benediction. The snow melted, revealing earth that had been frozen for months. Green pushed through the mud. Trees budded. The air lost its knife edge and became soft, almost sweet. Genevieve stood on the terrace watching Nicholas play in the garden below. He was 8 now, his leg fully healed, running through the flower beds with an energy that would have been unthinkable a year ago. He'd changed. The rigid formality had melted like the snow. He laughed now, loudly and often. He climbed trees, he got dirty. He asked 1,000 questions about everything. He was finally a child. And Genevieve had changed too. The numbness around her heart had thawed slowly, painfully, but thoroughly. She spent her days with Nicholas, teaching him mathematics, reading to him, playing games, listening to his endless observations about insects and clouds and the mechanics of trains. She loved him with a fierceness that sometimes frightened her, making up for lost time perhaps, or simply being the mother she should have been from the beginning. As for Thaddeus, he was attempting to change, and it wasn't easy. At first it was awkward, almost painful to watch. A man who'd spent 36 years being hard and controlled, suddenly struggling to be warm. He didn't know how to play, didn't understand silliness. Got frustrated when Nicholas asked him to pretend, but he persisted. Genevieve watched him one afternoon down on his hands and knees in the grass, letting Nicholas use him as a mountain for his toy soldiers. Thaddeus's face was a study in concentration, as if playing were a technical skill he could master through application. Nicholas was giggling, completely unself-conscious, happy. And Thaddeus was smiling. A real smile, small and uncertain but genuine. It was progress. Slow, difficult, sometimes backward progress, but progress nonetheless. But it wasn't without setbacks. One afternoon in early summer, Thaddeus returned from the city tense and sharp-edged. A labor dispute at the rail yards had turned violent. 2 workers injured. Production halted. The board demanding answers. That evening during Nicholas's Latin lesson, the old Thaddeus emerged. Nicholas stumbled over a declension, a simple mistake, the kind any 8-year-old would make. "Again," Thaddeus said sharply. "Ashfords don't make careless errors." Nicholas's face shuddered. His spine went rigid. The happy child from the garden disappeared, replaced by the frightened little soldier. Genevieve appeared in the doorway. She'd been passing by and heard the tone. "Nicholas, go to the garden." After he left, she turned to Thaddeus. You're doing it again. Thaddeus's hands clenched. The company is under pressure. I need to. I don't care about the company. Her voice was steel. I care about your son, our son. I was just correcting a mistake. You were being the man who drove him into a blizzard. She stepped closer. You think you can switch it on and off, the warmth you can't. He needs consistency. He needs to know that when he makes a mistake, and he will make mistakes because he's a child, you won't turn back into the man who terrified him. I wasn't terrifying him. Yes, you were. I saw his face. He was right back in that nursery, rigid and scared, desperate not to disappoint you. Thaddeus opened his mouth, closed it, sat down heavily. I don't know how to do this, he said quietly. The company is falling apart. Workers are threatening to strike. The board is questioning my leadership. And I'm supposed to come home and be soft and warm and... You're supposed to choose, Genevieve said. Right now, empire or family, because you can't have both if you're going to let the empire turn you back into the man you were. That's not fair. Life isn't fair, Thaddeus. But you made a promise to Nicholas, to me, that you would be different. So choose. She left him there. An hour later, she found him in the garden with Nicholas. They were sitting on the grass, and Thaddeus was showing Nicholas how to make a paper boat. I'm sorry, she heard Thaddeus say, for snapping at you during your lesson. You weren't being careless. You were being 8 years old, and that's exactly what you should be. Nicholas looked up at him uncertainly. You're not angry. No, I'm not angry. Thaddeus's hands fumbled with the paper. I'm stressed about work, but that's not your problem. That's mine, and I shouldn't have taken it out on you. It's okay, Papa. It's not okay, and I'm going to work very hard to make sure it doesn't happen again. He pulled Nicholas into an awkward hug. The boy clung to him. From the terrace, Genevieve watched them and felt her throat tighten. He was learning, slowly, with setbacks, but learning. As spring deepened into early summer, the three of them found a rhythm. Not the rhythm of a normal family. There was too much damage, too much history for that. But their own rhythm, tentative, careful, hopeful. Genevieve and Thaddeus were not reconciled. They maintained separate chambers, separate lives in many ways. They were polite to each other, sometimes kind, occasionally in unguarded moments almost friendly. But the wound between them was still there, still raw. Some things Genevieve thought couldn't be healed, only survived. One afternoon in May, she was in the garden with Nicholas when Thaddeus approached. He'd been in the city for 2 days dealing with railroad business. Genevieve, may I speak with you? She nodded to Nicholas. Go see if Cook has any of those lemon cakes you love. After he ran off, she turned to Thaddeus. What is it? I've been thinking. He looked uncomfortable, which was unusual enough to make her pay attention. About what you said, that I need to introduce myself, that you and Nicholas don't know who I am beyond the railroad baron. Yes? I'd like to try. He pulled something from his pocket, a small wooden boat clearly hand-carved. I made this for Nicholas. I thought maybe we could take it to the pond, the three of us. I could show him how to sail it. Genevieve looked at the boat. It was crude, the carving amateur, but it was also clearly made with care. Hours of work evident in the smooth hull, the tiny mast. You made this? I used to carve things, as a boy, before my father. He stopped. It's been a long time. I'm not very good anymore. I think it's wonderful. He looked at her, surprise flickering across his face. Really, son? Really. She took the boat, examining it more closely. Nicholas will love it. I thought maybe... He cleared his throat. Maybe you could come with us to the pond. We could, he struggled with the word. We could spend the afternoon together, as a family. It was the first time he'd ever asked her to spend time with him outside of obligation. Genevieve studied his face, saw the vulnerability there, quickly hidden but present. All right, she said softly, we'll go to the pond. They went that afternoon, the three of them walking through the grounds together. Nicholas ran ahead, then circled back full of boundless energy. He chattered about everything and nothing, the birds, the clouds, a beetle he'd found that morning. Thaddeus listened with focused attention, asking questions genuinely engaging. At the pond, he showed Nicholas how to set the boat in the water, how to angle the sail to catch the breeze. The boat tipped over immediately. Nicholas laughed. Thaddeus looked frustrated. He'd wanted it to be perfect. It's okay, Father. We'll try again. They tried again and again. The boat capsized more times than it sailed. But Nicholas didn't care. He was having fun. And slowly, carefully, Thaddeus began to have fun too. Genevieve watched from the bank, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. After an hour, Nicholas ran off to chase a frog, leaving his parents alone by the water. Thaddeus picked up the boat, examining it critically. I should have made it more stable. The weight distribution is off. It's perfect, Genevieve said, because you made it for him. That's what matters. He looked at her. I don't know how to do this. Do what? Any of it. Being a father, being a... He stopped, then pushed forward. Being a husband, worth having. You're working at it. That counts for something. Does it? His voice was raw. After everything I've done, after the way I've hurt you both, does working at it actually matter? Or is it too late? Genevieve was quiet for a long moment, watching the water ripple in the breeze. I don't know, she said honestly. I don't know if we can fix what's broken between us. I don't know if I can ever forgive you completely for choosing him over me, for 7 years of distance, for making me into someone I didn't recognize. I understand. But she turned to face him. I do know that you're working to be better, for Nicholas. And maybe someday, if you keep working for us, that's not nothing, Thaddeus. Is there, he struggled with the words, is there any chance for us? I don't know. She looked at where Nicholas was crouched by the water, poking at something with the stick, completely absorbed. But maybe we don't need to know right now. Maybe we just need to keep working, one day at a time. Thaddeus followed her gaze to their son. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. I love him so much it terrifies me. I didn't expect that. I thought an heir was just a dynasty requirement. I didn't know it would feel like this. Like what? Like my heart is walking around outside my body. Like every scraped knee is a catastrophe. Like the thought of losing him would end me. Genevieve understood that feeling exactly. And you, Sam, Thaddeus continued quietly. I didn't know I didn't understand. He started again. When I thought I might lose you during childbirth, when I had to choose, I told myself the line was what mattered. The legacy. But the truth is I was terrified. And I made the wrong choice. I chose wrong, Genevieve. I'm sorry. It was the first time he'd ever truly apologized. I know, she said simply. Can you ever forgive me? She looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd bought her, broken her, chosen their child over her life. This man who was now working desperately and awkwardly to be better. I don't know, she said again, but maybe someday, if you keep working, if you keep showing up, if you keep being the father Nicholas needs and the man you're becoming, maybe someday. I'll take maybe. He reached out tentative and took her hand. She didn't pull away. They stood there by the pond holding hands like uncertain teenagers watching their son play. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't love, but it was a beginning. And sometimes Genevieve thought a beginning was enough. The garden was in full bloom, roses and lilacs filling the air with perfume that the summer breeze carried through the open terrace doors. Genevieve stood at the railing watching Thaddeus and Nicholas below. They were building something, a treehouse, from the looks of the lumber scattered around the old oak. Nicholas was giving instructions with absolute authority, pointing and gesturing. Thaddeus was following them, hammer in hand, occasionally asking questions that Nicholas answered with exaggerated patience. They were both smiling. Genevieve felt someone approach behind her. Mrs. Pembroke carrying a tea tray. Your afternoon tea, ma'am. Thank you, Mrs. Pembroke. The housekeeper set down the tray, then paused, looking out at the scene below. It's different now, she said quietly. The house feels different. Yes, Genevieve agreed, it does. Warmer, like it's finally a home instead of just a building. Genevieve smiled. I think you're right. After Mrs. Pembroke left, she poured her tea and continued watching her husband and son. They'd come so far in the past 2 years. Nicholas was thriving, confident, joyful, loved. Thaddeus had softened in ways she wouldn't have thought possible. He still ran his railroad with iron efficiency, but he came home for dinner every night. He played with Nicholas every evening. He was learning slowly to be a father first and a magnate second. And he and Genevieve, they were partners now. Not lovers, not yet, perhaps not ever. But partners, raising Nicholas together, making decisions together, building something that, while different from a traditional marriage, was still meaningful. Last month, Thaddeus had moved his chambers closer to hers. Not the same room, they weren't ready for that. But connected by a sitting room they sometimes shared in the evenings, reading while Nicholas did his lessons. It was companionship, respect, something that might someday become more, or might not. And Genevieve found she was all right with that uncertainty. Below, Nicholas called out, Mama, come see, we're almost finished. She set down her teacup and descended to the garden. Thaddeus was wiping sweat from his forehead, leaving a smudge of dirt behind. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his hands covered in sawdust. He looked nothing like the man who'd torn her veil on their wedding night. He looked like a man, flawed, working, human. What do you think? He asked, gesturing to the half-built platform in the tree. I think it's wonderful. Nicholas beamed. Father let me use the hammer. I only hit my thumb once. Only once, Genevieve feigned shock. That's very impressive. She stood between them, her husband and her son, and felt something settle in her chest. Peace, maybe. Or just the absence of constant pain. Thaddeus looked at her over Nicholas's head. Their eyes met. In his gaze, she saw gratitude, hope, and something else, something that might be love, or might be the memory of what love could have been, or might be the seed of what love could still become. She didn't pull away when he reached for her hand. It was dusty and calloused and still slightly uncertain, but it was warm, not the bruising grip from their wedding night, not the calculated touch of a man taking inventory, just warmth. Nicholas grabbed both their hands, pulling them toward the tree. Come on, I want to show you the secret compartment Father helped me build. They followed their son hand in hand into the dappled shade beneath the oak. A family, imperfect, scarred by the past. Built on contracts and broken promises and choices that nearly destroyed them all. But healing. And in the golden afternoon light, with the scent of roses in the air, and their child's laughter ringing out, Genevieve thought about that wedding night 9 years ago. You're here only to give me an heir. She looked at Thaddeus covered in sawdust and smiling at their son. She looked at Nicholas happy and whole and loved. And she realized they were no longer here only for an heir. They were here for each other. That was everything.